What was the thing that pushed you to enter into this race?
So actually what pushed me to run into this race is I came here on leave. I was in the military, and usually for Christmas I would come home on leave. So I came here and I went downtown Toledo. I went to the Old West End, which is one of my favorite spots, and was looking at the Christmas lights with my niece. And we actually stopped at a gas station to use the restroom. And my niece was not allowed to use the restroom because the restrooms were not available to the public because there were too many drug overdoses. And not only that, but the gas stations were literally too scared to have it to the public for nefarious activities. So that was my first clue that what has happened to my own hometown. So I went to Central Catholic. I used to go downtown all the time, and it was fine. So I thought, what has happened in 20 years where my niece, who's 15 years old, cannot even use a public restroom? So I had been stationed in DC, and I was a military legislative liaison, and so I worked with the Budget Appropriations Committee. So I started to see how Marcy Kaptur was voting. I'd always assumed she was a conservative Democrat who voted based on Northwest Ohio. She, in my opinion, was voting like she was somebody from California or New York and not representing Northwest Ohio. So that's actually what sort of sparked me to go, okay, my hometown deserves better.
What are some of the other issues that you would like to be able to make an impact on?
So the first thing is manufacturing. We have really hollowed out this area. You know, during World War II, we were the American might here, right? It was the glass city. We were making engines. We don't do any of that anymore, not to the scale that we did. And so since 1983, since Ms. Kaptur has been here, we have lost 400,000 manufacturing jobs in Ohio. So if your job is to protect those jobs and we've lost that many, I'm sorry, but you get an F on your report card. You're not securing those jobs. So what I'd like to do is figure out, one, how do we bring back more jobs? And then also, not only that, but new things, right? Let's be honest, we're not going to get all the manufacturing jobs that we shipped over, unfortunately, to China and Mexico, but there's new jobs that we can bring back here, and we have to incentivize people to look at Toledo as an option. We have a port, we have a highway. This is one of the best places in the world, in Northwest Ohio, and it's not really been, I think, advertised in a way to bring back big businesses.
And U.S. manufacturing is certainly in the spotlight now as this conversation about tariffs and free trade is happening. Where exactly do you stand on the issue of tariffs? Because in Northwest Ohio, obviously agriculture is a big part of business. Farmers tend to be a little bit anxious in terms of the impact that has on their bottom line. But then you also have auto manufacturers that have losses that they're kind of taking into account with tariffs. So what's your position on the president's policy currently?
I really think the president has done the hard work that both Republicans and Democrats have never done, right? So everybody talked about doing this, but nobody actually did it. So in terms of tariffs, it's a patience game, right? It's a little bit painful, right, at first when you do this. However, we're going to have sovereign options for our country. What hollowed out this industry is like we just shipped them overseas. But when you put tariffs on it, it's going to stimulate our own industrial base. And that's exciting. And I tell people during COVID, the prices of cars went up because we couldn't even find that we didn't have the chips for them. And so we couldn't even make our own chips in the United States. That is bizarre to me that we don't have our own industrial base for manufacturing. So I think this is going to bring back those jobs that we want and also give us sovereign options so we don't have to rely on China. We don't have to rely on other countries for those things. In terms of farmers, I think they have been completely left out by Ms. Kaptur. She has really looked at just Toledo, and Northwest Ohio is so much more than just Toledo and Lucas County, right? I don't think the things that she has voted for have also been in the favor of farmers.
And obviously you mentioned that tariffs, they do have that initial hard impact when they're first instated. What do you think is going to be the length of time it's going to take for these positive benefits that you say will eventually come? How long should farmers and businesses expect to wait for these tariffs to have a positive impact rather than a negative one?
Well, it takes a while to get an industry started, right? So once people realize, okay, wait a minute, we are going to have a chips facility. Oh, wait, we're going to have our own steel. That's going to make them feel more secure. So it really depends on business. How do businesses feel that, okay, they're going to be able to start their businesses here, right? Or are they confident they're not going to get shipped away again, and then in 4 years it's going to change? So I say in about 2 years, I think 2026, 2027, you're going to start to see businesses opening up in these industries because they feel secure that this is going to be stable for them.
There has kind of been this on and off effect of tariffs where the president will announce them, he will instate some, maybe not instate others. Businesses, it's kind of hard to work through uncertainty. Do you think that that uncertainty is a good thing for business?
I don't think there's uncertainty. I think what the president is doing, he's looking at certain industries. So, for example, he's looking at specifically steel. He's looking at very specific things that are going to affect people that maybe we can't do right now. So I don't think it's uncertainty. I think he's negotiating each thing based on what businesses are telling him.
And I do want to speak to one of the things you mentioned, which was manufacturing jobs, because obviously in order to fill manufacturing jobs, you have to have people to do those jobs. Our region, definitely Toledo in particular, has seen a lot of population loss. We've also seen a lot of people who have maybe obtained college degrees and they left the area. And that obviously has a negative impact on tax revenue and just the jobs that will come here because companies may not decide to come here if they just don't have the workforce. What policies do you think could help reverse that trend of population decline that this region has been experiencing?
I think you hit on something as a population loss, and you have to look at why. So what happened, right? Because you saw these manufacturing jobs leave and they weren't stable, right? So as I grew up, people were getting laid off, especially in the union. So I come from a union household. I'm a proud union daughter. I'm pro-union. I think there's value in that, and vocational schools, right? So my sister, she's a union electrician. She went through a vocational trade. What people realize is these are not stable jobs. So their parents, it's a generational thing, their parents told them, hey, you need to go to college, because people who have college degrees aren't losing their jobs. And so people left because they didn't see themselves be able to thrive in Toledo. And that's what happens when you hollow out jobs. People leave. And so how do we get people to stay here? Well, it's through jobs, which also goes into drug use. Okay, so these all tie together in my mind. You've hollowed out our jobs here. Okay, now we have an influx of drugs. And so Ohio, and I hate this statistic, Ohio is number 7 on overdoses, and 80 to 90% are related to fentanyl. And I'll tell you, being on the campaign trail, there's so many people I've spoken to who've lost their children to fentanyl, or they've lost their parents to fentanyl. So now we have a drug problem, and we've hollowed out jobs. Right. And so when the president and everyone talks about securing the border, this is what I'm talking about. Right. We've opened our borders where these drugs can come over. Right. So fentanyl is really cheap. It comes from China, and then it ships through Mexico and then comes through our border. So how is a place like Toledo, Northwest Ohio, affected by, the border? Well, because drugs are coming through. And so that's what I'm really frustrated about, is that we have had somebody in office who hasn't voted to actually help protect this region.
Most Americans, they believe in immigration. It's what our country is built upon. But of course, there are also those folks making the argument that there needs to be more security. Where is the middle point, how you balance immigration as it is the foundation of our country, as well as border security? What's that middle point?
Yeah, so listen, we're a country of immigrants, right? There's no doubt about it, right? Besides probably Native Americans. And so I think it's the legal immigration. That is the real crux of the issue here. Just coming over here without going through a process is not okay. And I want to share something with you. So I worked with a nonprofit called No One Left Behind. And it specifically worked with folks from Iraq and Afghanistan. So we had interpreters when people were deployed. They worked shoulder to shoulder with us, right? They were in the most dangerous spots. Their own country sometimes looked at them as enemies because they worked with the United States, right? And there was a program called a Special Immigrant Visa for those who actually helped us. It still took about 2 years to vet them. And they already had worked with us. They had already worked with us. And we vetted them, and then they come over. And some of them, it took a year, just depended. But there is a process to do that. And that is the way to do it. But just coming over here in troves without going through that process, you can't do that. That's not a country.
So what do you make of the current way the administration is addressing this issue? Because as you mentioned, there were delays in just getting interpreters here to the U.S. for refuge, but obviously you have students that are caught up in this because they may have student visas that are currently taking longer to be reviewed. Is there a smoother way to go about this process in addition to ICE enforcement, which a lot of it has taken place with masked agents, which has raised concerns there? So what can be the way this system can be improved?
So let me talk about that. So I was in law enforcement. I was a special agent. I've gone to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. You know, people keep saying there's these masked police officers, but why are they masked? They're masked because they've actually been put in danger. People are coming after them. So that's how bad it is, where law enforcement are also being targeted. So that's why they're wearing their mask. It's an unfortunate situation that police officers don't even feel safe enough that they can show their faces. And so when we're talking about the deportation, we're talking about criminals. So I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. If you are an illegal immigrant and committing crimes here, I'm sorry, you don't get to stay here, right? That's just, you can't do that. Can you imagine if I go to another country, I'm not a citizen, and I'm committing crimes? That's unacceptable. So I think what the president is doing in terms of that, he's cracking down on crime. And honestly, we're seeing a decrease over the border just by the president's stances, right? I call it general deterrence, right? People realize if you're going to come to America, you need to be a law-abiding citizen and you have to follow a process.
One of the issues I also want to touch on in this interview is healthcare. Could you speak to our healthcare system? Obviously, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that the president really pushed for, it passed, and it made some cuts to Medicaid, and there were certainly concerns about that, how that'll look down the road. What's your position on the healthcare system? How can it be improved? Because certainly there's room for efficiency, but currently there isn't much efficient about it.
So I do want to touch on that. You know, I think everyone has gotten sort of this thing that the president wanted to cut in Medicaid and Medicare. That was not it at all, right? So your grandpa and grandpa, who really need this care, that is what it's there for. It was the fraud in the program, and we've lost that piece of it. So I did fraud for many years. I'm telling you, there is fraud in these programs. It's people who say they can't work, and then they're out there working under the table, right? So it cut into that fraud piece of it. And if you look at the bill, that's exactly what it was going after. But it is not to actually get rid of the people who actually need it.
I do want to talk about that too. Work requirements was one of the things that were instituted in this bill. In some states, the experience with work requirements is that it's been more costly to implement them than the return you get by having those work requirements there in the first place. So are work requirements just extra paperwork for not much return?
I don't think so. I think there's a process. If you're going to be on some sort of government funding, that's the process you have to do. So I wouldn't categorize it as that. But in terms of our healthcare system, we have to be more preventative, right? We can't have surprise bills. When people go to the emergency room, you know, they get a surprise bill. That is not okay. I think we have to put people back in charge of their own healthcare. Insurance has just gotten, you know, sort of out of control. And that's what, unfortunately, I think you saw with Obamacare. Premiums have gone up and up and up. And at what point can families no longer afford premiums? So I think healthcare, we have to look at the preventative side. Maybe you could look into health savings accounts, almost similar to what we do and give a tax-free benefit. This wouldn't be for emergency care, of course, but you know, to be able to go to your normal doctor's appointments, and then also get people stop having to go to the emergency room to get care. I don't think anyone is necessarily satisfied with our healthcare system, but let's take what does work and then reform the rest of it.
I do want to discuss geopolitics as well, because the world right now, you have a few different situations unfolding. Obviously, the war in Gaza, which has claimed thousands of lives. You have, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine, which has also been a very deadly one. What should be the approach that the U.S. takes, especially with regard to Ukraine? We're going to start there first. Obviously, Ukraine has really stayed stronger than people have imagined. So what should be the steps toward achieving a peace in Ukraine?
Well, I think what you just saw is you saw the president was in Alaska, right? He was negotiating with President Putin. And this is, we cannot continue to write a blank check for Ukraine. So you have to come to the table and figure out, how are we going to diplomatically solve this? You know, the emblem of the United States has arrows and an olive branch. Every problem is not an arrow. We need to figure this out diplomatically. We have forgot to use that arm. We've just been using the arrows. And so I think if we're going to negotiate something, that there's going to be a negotiation between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. So I really commend what the president is trying to do to end this war. And so at the end of the day, American taxpayers should not be continuing to write a blank check for Ukraine. And on top of that, not only the money aspect, but all the lives that are being lost over what? Over territory. We can figure this out.
Is it possible, though, to negotiate with Russian President Vladimir Putin? Because would a land swap just incentivize him to continue war on Ukraine?
Well, I think not only is it possible, it's happening, right? The president's already is doing that. So whether it's terms of a land swap, how do we get peace, I think is the question. We're already here. I think we can try to theorize about land swaps, but we're already here. So how do we get out? How do we maneuver out of this? We have to accept the situation we're in and then figure those next steps out.
So should security guarantees be a part of a permanent peace?
Possibly, if it brings peace.
And I do also, of course, want to discuss the war in Gaza, right? Because this situation, Israel obviously claims it's defending itself against Hamas, but at the same time, you have many civilian deaths, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. In this situation, the U.S. has obviously provided billions of dollars to Israel for its security. At what point should a peace be negotiated there? Obviously, talks are happening now, but at what point should there be a permanent peace solution?
I think, first of all, it's awful what's happening there. Lives are being lost, children are being affected. I absolutely hate that. I'm a product of a war-torn country, and I will tell you, it's civilians, it's kids who suffer the most. I think we have to really look at Hamas here, right? So what has Hamas done? It's a terrorist organization that has essentially been funded by Iran, and it's been happening for years. And so if we're going to really get some peace there, we have to defeat Hamas and we have to address that terrorism. And so also, militarily, I don't care what anybody says, Israel is a reliable partner for the United States. They have actually helped us defeat and beat terrorism in the Middle East. So if we can get rid of Hamas, I absolutely think we can have stabilization between Israel, Palestine, Gaza. I think it's absolutely possible to have a peaceful situation. And I'm really confident with this president that there's possibility of peace. And this is something I'm really passionate about, is how do we, no kidding, get peace in the Middle East? I know it hasn't happened for thousands of years, but I think we're going to inch closer, and I think the president is leading with strength. I think that's what you need. The Middle East respects strength, and that's what we need.
I want to ask if you're confident in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has said that this war is won against Hamas, but when you look at the thousands of civilians that have been killed, at what point is it just no longer worth the effort? Because it's definitely killing more people than really targeting Hamas.
Well, no war is ever worth the effort. That's why you have to figure out peace. And peace is really hard to do. I mean, look at Ukraine and Russia. Peace is really hard because people have to give up both things on both sides. And so I think we're in a position, I will echo this, we are in a position of strength right now, and I think we're really close to seeing peace between those two countries.
Alea Nadeem, candidate for Ohio's 9th Congressional District. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you.